Welcome, everybody. This is Real Talk with Ryan, and it is Wednesday, September 2nd, and we are blessed and excited to have Betzy Lynch as our featured guest today. And Betzy, I'm going to let you do a quick introduction because what I find out about you and your organization is you and I've got to know each other, and Betzy and I are in the same stage group together, and we've gotten to know each other in there, and she's really helped me quite a bit on some of the internal things that I've dealt with at our business, but also she's dealt with her organization, and she's got such an interesting story. And so I'm going to have you take us through some of it, and also starting with introduce yourself, what you're doing, and talk to us about your organization with the Jewish Community Center and why you guys exist as a mission. And then we'll get into more detail. So with that, we're excited to have Betzy. Thank you so much. And Betzy, tell us a little bit about Betzy and the Jewish Community Center.
So thanks, Ryan, so much for having me. It has been a total pleasure getting to know you, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of the conversation today. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Youngstown, Ohio, which is northeastern Ohio, for those of you that don't know, right between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Youngstown used to be a steel town back in the day, and really since most of my youth and beyond, Youngstown was a significantly depressed area. And unlike Pittsburgh and some other steel towns across the country, a very difficult time in reinventing itself. So I grew up in kind of a depressed area where most of us growing up there knew that it wasn't somewhere necessarily we would stay. I grew up in a Jewish family that was mostly not terribly religious, but definitely grew up in a Jewish community, and I grew up at a Jewish community center, meaning I went to preschool there, I learned to play softball there, I learned to play basketball there, I learned to swim there, I went to summer camp there every summer. It was a great place. I went to undergraduate school at Goucher College in Baltimore, where I played tennis and basketball and studied business, and was convinced that I was going to spend my career in professional sports. And when I first graduated, I actually spent a little over a year working for the Baltimore Orioles, but that was the year of the baseball strike. So my baseball career ended pretty quickly, and luckily while I was there, I had built some connections into the for-profit world and working with some businesses. So I went to work for a publicly traded beverage company, and I did that for about a year and a half while I was coaching college tennis. I loved my coaching job, hated being in the sort of sales and marketing space. It just wasn't for me in the for-profit world, and decided that I would go back and get my master's so that I could coach college tennis. I got my master's degree at Indiana State University, where in exercise science, physical education, and coaching. And while I was there, my graduate assistantship was to teach physical education majors concepts in physical education so they could teach kids. And I learned really quickly that if I was going to work with college students for the rest of my life, I wasn't going to make it in that either. And so I was really at this precipice while I was in graduate school finishing my thesis, which is like, what was I going to do now? Because the thing that I thought that I went there to do, I wasn't going to do. In which case then, I started looking at jobs. I had a couple of things on the horizon, just talking to the YMCA system, whatever, and I had a phone conversation with my mother, and my mom was like, why in the world would you go work for a Y when you could work for a JCC? And like, I grew up in a J, spent my whole life in the J, did whatever, and it never even occurred to me that I should do that as a job. Anyway, I sent my application to our national organization and said, I think I'm interested in doing this. I'm not really sure that there'll be anything available, but here's my resume. I had 4 interviews within 5 days and started my career as the Assistant Health, Physical Education, and Recreation Director at the JCC of the Greater Palm Beaches, and moved around the United States working for Jewish community centers, and both in Youngstown. So I got to go back to the JCC where I grew up. There were a whole bunch of reasons why I ended up back in Youngstown, but it was one of the treasures of my career was giving back to the community that raised me, and it was amazing. Left the JCC in Youngstown, become the Assistant Executive Director of the JCC in Memphis, Tennessee, and that started my 15-year stint in the Deep South. Was in Memphis for about 9.5 years, and then moved to Birmingham, Alabama to be the Executive Director of the JCC there. For 4.5 years, and then was headhunted to come out here to San Diego to be the CEO of the JCC of the Lawrence Family JCC, which is where I am now. and so happy to be in San Diego and so happy to be at the Lawrence Family JCC. For those of you that don't know much about JCCs, Jewish Community Centers, there's about 170 of them on the continent. And the role and goal of most JCCs is to do exactly what our name says, is build community. The way we build community amongst very diverse people is in a multitude of ways, but the primary ways are with early childhood education, camping services for school-age children in the summer, senior services, fitness, aquatics, and recreational programs. And then in the case of our JCC, we have a very robust arts and culture program. We have like a mini performing arts center right inside of our JCC. And we have 2 film festivals that we put on during the year. And in addition, we have an amazing youth theater program that hundreds of children participate in and sort of learn the gift and love of theater through that. So there's a multitude of ways to connect. We use Jewish values to inform our work. But what I like to say that we do at the J every day is 1, to allow people to connect to each other, 2, to connect to themselves. And the last one is to connect to Jewish life. Every kind of person comes through the doors of the JCCs. There's no socioeconomic barriers to our work. We don't turn anyone away for their inability to pay. People can participate in our programs, and our community is incredibly generous in providing financial assistance to those that can't. And it's every flavor of person that you could possibly imagine are welcome and embraced in our community. So the goal of this inevitably is to have people to understand a Jewish life, to eventually rid the world of anti-Semitism. And that we know from a very young age, if we can learn to not other people, that we really have the ability to change the scope of what each of us with our own individual talents and special gifts could bring to the world. And that's the goal of our work.
Thank you, Betsy. I love what you guys stand for, what you guys try to accomplish. And, you know, there are a couple places that you started with as you talked through your journey and also talked through your mission. And a couple things speak to me. You know, I work with the California Center for the Arts, and we have an arts program. And there's 2 elements. I'm going to take you down one road and then take you a circle back to the other. The first one is how that arts and culture can really define someone's, and you said find yourself, right? Where they have a place to go. And so there's 2 parts to the question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. And you've said to me before that most people think just on the surface that, oh, I have to be Jewish to go. And you've already said that, no, you don't, it's for anybody. But the mission behind, we want to give people a place that they can go where they know that they won't be discriminated against, that they won't experience the kind of pressures or societal bias that so many do. And you and I were talking about this earlier today. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that piece and how you reach out to people to let them know it's a safe place. And then how you use arts and cultures to really help people find themselves in your organization.
Sure. So your first question actually is deeply driven by Jewish tradition. So it's the great work of Abraham. And so indulge me for just a minute to share a little Torah with you. So Abraham, if you remember in the stories in the very beginning of what would be Genesis, right? He actually doesn't wait for people to come to his tent. He actually goes outside of the tent to welcome people into his tent and then treats them as incredible guests. That's the work of the JCC, is this outreach into community to invite people to come to be in this space for their own self-discovery. One of the most important things that we can do for people is not attach judgment to who they are choosing to become. And so what art in particular does allows for self-exploration without judgment. And what the community that we've created here does is support the idea of that self-exploration. We've had kids that have been part of our youth theater program that in turn have learned that they are transgender. We have children that have become deeply religious. We've had children who were deeply religious that chose something other than that. We've had every kind of experience under the sun, but because we've provided a space for that honesty and transparency and support for these kids to really become who they need to be. And the art space seems to allow for that sort of self-exploration, maybe a little bit different than other ways that people connect to each other. And ours is deeply rooted in the tradition of the idea that we need to support people being the best version of themselves.
I
And
love that.
and when we give them the opportunity to connect with diverse people, it allows them to understand themselves and the world in a different way. So even in particular times like under the COVID conditions, which I'm sure we'll get to later, we've even tried to be thoughtful about how do we go beyond our address to make sure that we're in places where people can see who in the best work of the JCC and find ways to replicate and duplicate those experiences that don't even exist here in the building. The second,
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much. This is Real Talk with Ryan. We're here with Betzy Lynch, the CEO of the Jewish Community Center in San Diego. You talked about, and we're going to come back to a few of those things, and we are going to talk about COVID and just how you try to exist and deliver that kind of message in this environment. So we won't miss on that. But a couple things you talked about on your journey, about, I always say for me that school and my journey in school was more about figuring out what not to do than it was actually figuring out what to do. And so I pivoted a number of times. Sometimes I pivoted after the first day of the first class. I'd get in and say, whoa, this is not what I thought. I'm not doing this. I'd still have to sit through the semester, but I would pivot off. And so in that coaching, you talked about, I want to do this, and then I want to do this. And in some of those things, along the way, I always pulled pieces that helped me on the next thing from each of those experiences. So talk about your coaching. I know you do a lot of coaching even now. Yeah. Some of the lessons you learned from your tennis coaching that really resonates with you now as you really do the work that you do in the community.
I would say so much of both my basketball and my coaching, tennis coaching experience inform who I am as a leader. In that, what I'm really trying to do, in this, Mark, you'll relate to this, which is trying to find ways for people to perform at their best. And I think what I learned, I think primarily is how individualized the attention and focus needs to be for each person. There's no such thing as a singular prescription to performance. And I also think I understood deeply, in order for people to be their best, listening to what their barriers, where they get stuck, and helping them get through the being stuck. Whether, in tennis it was, I can't get my second serve in the way that I want to, or whatever it is. In business life, it's that I can't get to understand the core pieces of the revenue drivers within my department to shift. And so if we're just sort of stuck in the cycle of recruiting and doing, and we can't get the program to grow. So it's sort of this really paying attention to the intricate details of what the person needs to get unstuck. And that solely can't come from me. It's also providing a peer environment that allows that to happen as well.
Love it. Thank you for that. This is Real Talk with Ryan. We're with Betzy Lynch, CEO of the Jewish Community Center. The chat box is open, so if anyone has any questions, comments, feel free to drop some chat in. I will work them into the questions. We'll also have time at the end for live questions off recording. So if you have questions that you want to ask personally, you're welcome to do that at the end. So you talked about the journey home. And I remember the Center for the Arts, and we're talking about, we're involved in similar businesses. So it's interesting to talk about this, but it got built when I was in college. And I went to one of the first events, which was the Marine Corps Band playing, and I went to it and I sat and I watched it and I was like, okay, this is a neat thing, and what a beautiful space, this and that, 25 years ago. Last year, I got to stand on the stage and introduce that band as the board treasurer at that time. And being able to give back to the community that, like you said, helped raise you. And what didn't quite raise me, but a place that I consumed as in my youth. What was going home like for you? I can't imagine walking in those steps for you. What was the reward of that opportunity?
So it's twofold, because there were parts that were totally amazing, and then there were a few things to overcome. So Youngstown, as I explained, is not a growing community. And so it's a tiny community to begin with, and it got even tinier in the time that I was away. And when I returned, the opportunity to run the camp that I had gone to, and thinking about my experiences, the truth is I hated summer camp as a kid, which made me a great camp director, because I knew the things that I didn't like and wanted to make sure that we didn't repeat them.
Yep.
It was ways to improve the things that we were doing and connect into meaningful ways throughout the entire community to actually uplift Youngstown as a whole was the part that I felt most proud of, which is getting the
Nice.
opportunity to return to a place where most of my contemporaries wouldn't or couldn't, because there was an opportunity and I had the chance. The
Mm,
other part that was a challenge, though, was how to get over being little Betzy. You can't
mm.
tell this from the screen, but I'm 4'10", and my name is Betzy. So to be taken seriously in a business space where I had grown up being significantly smaller than the rest of my friends, and knowing the people that were on the boards of directors of the organization, knowing me as a little kid, to then being seen as a professional and getting over being little Betzy, was a really important challenge and a really important piece of my career. And had I not had that experience, I'm not sure that I would have understood the power of how to use my voice and my credibility and my thought process in ways that I needed to overcome that. Whereas, and if I had been in a completely new setting where no one had known that about me, I'm not sure that would have even been in the forefront of my experience.
Wow. Was it hard to leave?
Yeah, for sure. It was hard to leave for multiple reasons. One, my parents were both still there, and my dad wasn't well. That's part of the reason why I actually moved back to begin with, which was I wanted to be there to help take care of my dad. But there was no opportunity for growth for me there. And I knew that if I stayed, that staying within the JCC realm wasn't going to be possible and advance my career. So I had to make choices. Eventually, what ended up happening is my parents ended up moving to Memphis so that I could continue to help take care of my dad. But, you know, life just allowed my growth as a professional and my needs for my family to balance out by doing it in a different way than I initially had, which is going to Youngstown.
You talk about the needs for the family, right? I'm always fascinated by, which is the leading indicator. Is are we following the work? Are we selecting the work and hoping we get the right opportunity? And so I guess my question is, and you can back into this, but was it, I want to go to San Diego, let's find an opportunity there? Or was it, oh, that's interesting, I think I'll end up in San Diego? So which was first? What direction did that go?
I never even occurred to me that I would come to San Diego, like never. There was so much work, as you can imagine, to be done in Birmingham, Alabama. And so I was going to be there for a while. Some of the struggles that I was encountering was a personal piece, which is, raising my kids in the Deep South and things that are societally acceptable there, which would never be acceptable to me, were in my face every day, and the constant need to remind my children that this is not how life should be.
Yes.
It gave me some impetus to know that we wouldn't be there forever, but coming to San Diego wasn't part of it. And just by sort of serendipitous circumstances, I was asked to serve on a task force for our continental JCC group, where I met Gary Jacobs, who's a past chair of the JCC. Some of you may be familiar with Gary and his family. They're very philanthropic to the entire city of San Diego. And David Wax, who is also on that, that's David's family owned. They just sold it recently. It's Waxy Sanitary Supply Company. It's a major business here. And I met the both of them, and the person, my predecessor, was in the phase of retiring, and they were beginning the search, and I happened to meet them at this meeting, and they called the woman that was doing the search for the next person that would work here, and they're like, you have to get Betzy to come interview. And the first time they called, I said, no, thank you. I wasn't interested in moving to the West Coast. And then they called the second time, and I was like, well, you're calling me twice. I probably should think about this. And I called two of my friends, and for sports people, you'll get the reference. I called them that are both in the field. One is the director of the JCC in Dallas, and the other one is in Tucson, Arizona. And I said to them, I was like, is this a Notre Dame job? Like, should I really be thinking about this? Which, as a Buckeye fan, it was pretty sad that that's what I said. But I was like, is this a Notre Dame job? And both of them said yes. So that's how I ended up here.
Wow. Well, we're happy to have you in our community here. You touched on it, and Betzy, you and I were talking about this before everyone popped on today, and it was an item that really got covered last week with our guest Donna DeBerry, who is the executive director CEO of the Black Chamber of Commerce and has done diversity and inclusion. And she talked about quite a bit last week around elevating and creating an opportunity for equality. And you and I were just talking about this. And when you've got places like Birmingham, and I'm not going to say anything about Birmingham or San Diego, but they're very, very different places, and they both have their unique sets of issues. Yeah. And every place has their unique sets of issues. How do you combat those society, those culture, those changes so that you can advance what your mission is in a way that actually creates change?
So it's twofold. The first one is, I think, understanding the nuances of the community. So for me, the beauty of my journey, which I shared all over the country, has been getting to know the uniqueness of each community, because it is different. Oh, you could be surprised how much is the same, but there are differences. So in that nuance actually comes some really special things. So the thing that I will share that is so incredibly special about San Diego, and it's like the secret sauce of why I guess it's the finest city in America, is that people here are really invested in you doing you. Never really been anywhere where like people are like, hey, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm going to do. If you want to be a part of that, great. If you don't want to be a part of it, you do your own thing, right? So on one hand, that's beautiful, because like in the South, there's a lot of judgment with that. There's a lot of judgment that if you're doing that thing and it's the thing that I'm not going to do, then there must be something wrong with you. And worse yet, I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm going to tell my neighbor about it. I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to be sweet to your face. That's how the South works. Right. But here, people are kind of like, you do your own thing. Now, when everyone decides to do their own thing, that's also a problem. Because how do you build community when everyone's willing just to do their own thing? And so the second part of the equation is one person at a time, which is one person connecting to another person. And that is the beauty of the work that we do here, is that the person that you're swimming in the lane next to in our Olympic-sized pool could be the serendipitous moment, that meaning the number of people that have said to me, well, I met my wife at the JCC, or I met my husband or my partner at the JCC, is like so many people, because it's just one person connecting to another person. And the more diverse the audience can be in the work that we do, the better opportunity there is to build those one-on-one connections. And in a space that is so driven by technology and what we're doing right now, which is trying to find ways to connect in a human way, there's nothing that changes your ability to connect human to human, one-on-one, face-to-face in a space like ours that is somewhat designed programmatically to create those connections, but leaves you enough space to really find your own way in it. And that's how that's our formula. That's what works here.
How similar are the centers? You said there's 170 on the continent. Is each one programmed to the liking of the CEO, or are they all generally running with the same program, same idea, same platform? And I know the facilities are probably very different all over, but how does it create a cohesive message when you're trying to wrangle 170 different locations?
So what's interesting is it's affiliation by choice. So in other words, you don't have to affiliate into the larger movement, but when you do affiliate into the larger movement, then there's thought leadership and a brain trust that you tap into. So the replication of great programming can happen more easily because you're tied together in this way.
Sure.
Each JCC does have its own sort of flavor and primary focus that is driven by the uniqueness of each community. But there's sort of core businesses of most JCCs that if you went into one J and went into another, you'd have a similar type of experience, which almost every Jewish community center has a center of excellence around early childhood education. That is a space where we are truly experts in the country in what it is to educate very young children. And we know 1 to 5 is the most critical time of education, and the power and the importance of this, and inviting diversity into that is so critical. The second piece is in camping services. Most JCCs have camps. Some of them are day camps like ours. Some of them also have day camps and residential camps, which is like sleepover camp as well. It just depends on the J. Almost all of them have some version of sports, fitness, and aquatics. Almost all of them have some level of senior services. The sports, fitness, and aquatics is divergent. Some JCCs don't have much of it. Some of them have a ton of it, and everywhere in between. And the arts and culture piece is really driven by community resource. And what I mean by that is if the community is very deep in culture and whatever, and there's an opportunity for the JCC to be a player in their space, then they do. If it's devoid of it, the JCC may choose to fill that, or if it's overpopulated in it, the JCC may be a partner in it or tap out of it because it's not necessary.
Got it. Well, so that brings us to, and again, this is Real Talk with Ryan with Betzy Lynch, CEO of the Jacobs Community Center, or the Jewish Community Center. COVID, right? Everything's changed, right? Throw all things up in the air. And, you know, with the work that I've done with the Center for the Arts, we've got a very similar problem to what you've got in that, you know, there is earned revenue programs, right? Where you're really generating programs that are fee for service. And yes, you don't want to turn people away and give them opportunities to participate. All that stuff is great for the community, but you're driving all this inflow from being able to bring people together through an event, through a concert, through an athletic activity, whatever that is. Then you have the donation portion of your mission. And it's easy for the community to lose track of why it's necessary to contribute with time or with financial resources when the perception is, well, aren't you just generating income from your facility? Aren't you just, you know, putting on events? And you take the events away, and suddenly now it really makes it difficult to fulfill the mission. How have you and the Jewish Community Center pivoted to still advance the mission while not being able to deploy all of these activities that are really what drives your ability to keep things moving?
It's a great question. So let me just share a little bit of the context of the business model behind the JCC, because I think it speaks to some of the things that you were just talking about, Ryan. Unlike a lot of nonprofits where contributed income is a primary source, and for us, it's about 25% of our budget is contributed income, which is donations from the community. And we do have nonprofit status. We are a 501c3, et cetera, but I like to say that we're for purpose rather than nonprofit, because we have to function as a business in order to be successful. And I look at the contributions that our donors are making as actually investments in community rather than investments looking to make the dividends come back and who they're building as a strong and healthy San Diego, not in dollars, right? So I look at the contributions as investments. To that end, 75% of our income, I consider the JCC as social entrepreneurship. 75% of our income was generated from a fee for service. So under the COVID restrictions, obviously, while we're still running an early childhood program, or we still run a camp for the summer, while we're still running all of our outdoor recreational programs and fitness programming and pivoted to do all of these things outside, it's at a fraction of the volume that we normally could have. So the financial modeling about the infrastructure that we built, our revenue is, you know, going to be at least $3 million less this year than it was in the previous years because we've had to shrink the volume so much. I'm proud to say that our community has stepped up in a significant way to fill a portion of that gap with additional contributed income. But the reality is that we're going to experience an unprecedented loss in this year because of the nature of what it is. And the confidence that I feel in knowing that we will weather this storm is knowing how our major donors, as well as the institution for the 75 this year, 2020 actually is the 75th anniversary of the Lawrence Family JCC at the Jacobs Family Campus. And in our 75 years, we've built sort of deep roots into the fabric that is San Diego. And so I know that the community will support us in our recovery phases and what will come next. And by the quality of the things that we've been able to do during this time. So we ran a summer camp this summer for 320 kids, starting at age 2 all the way up to 8th grade. And no one got sick the whole summer. Everyone was safe. I like knock on whatever wood we need to or whatever. No one, there was not a case of COVID in the whole thing, not a staff member, not a family member, not a kid. And so the more that we have the ability to create a safe, healthy space for people still to have human connection, the work of the JCC is even more relevant in this moment than it was even 6 months ago. So that's why we have to keep going. And the financial piece is, this is the gift that I have that people that are working in the for-profit world don't. The gift that I have is that I can assume some risk of taking a loss, knowing that the work that we're doing is life-changing for people and necessary, because we're avoiding a couple of the other crises beyond people getting COVID, which is the mental health and wellness crisis that's going to come out of this, and then helping people to get back to work so that we don't have the economic crisis, because we're taking care of their kids so they can go to work. I mean, this is the space and the relevance that the JCC has to be in this moment, and that we're just going to have to understand that financially we're going to need support of the community to get beyond and to recover from the services that we're providing right now.
Well, I love that approach and that mindset. Betzy, you and I talked about how do you keep the staff, because you've got a really broad staff and a lot of people working towards advancing this cause and this mission. But they're all going through their own trauma, their own set of unique circumstances. And now I'm dealing with it right now I've got a daughter at home who's kicked me out of my home office because she's got to do school in there, and the school sort of knows what they're doing, but sort of doesn't. And there's chaos there, and then work's got all this stuff happening. And you go through all these components where your staff is swirling while trying to combat the organization swirling, while trying to deliver a cohesive vision of what you guys do. How do you keep the staff motivated and moving and focused on, hey, here's why we exist, here's what we're looking for, so that they stay focused on what the real reason you exist is?
Yeah. I've spent a good deal of time. I didn't mention that I also have a certificate from the Jewish Theological Seminary in Jewish Experiential Leadership. And reflection. Reflection is a huge piece of motivation that people overlook, and reflection is a huge piece of learning. So what we've spent a good deal of time, both in our staff meetings as well as in smaller group meetings that we have, or even one-on-one when I meet with the team, which is really reflecting on progress and developing new key performance indicators for under the moment so that they can feel success every day. They need to feel that progress every day. They need to feel the incremental steps. They tease me all the time because what I say to them is, change doesn't happen in a day, it happens daily. But you have to recognize the daily pieces in which that occurs. And so looking back over a course of a whole week, or looking over a whole month, beyond just our financial statements, which right now I said all we're paying attention to is cash. Forget about anything else. We just need to make sure we have cash in the bank. And as long as we have cash in the bank, let's not worry about the financial piece, because at this point, there's only so much we can control. And what we can control, then we will. And the most important thing, and I've been totally transparent about offering forgiveness to themselves, taking care of themselves. And, we have an EAP, we make sure that they're getting resources that they need for their own mental health. We're constantly having conversations to destigmatize any need for therapeutic conditions, and also sort of who we need to be to each other in this moment. But in addition to that, it's also motivating them to understand that the specificity of the role that they play is much less important right now. It's that they work for the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center. So in ways that they've never been able to be valuable to us before, they now have the chance to be valuable. So as an example, I had a woman that was working in our senior services department. Obviously, our senior programming is totally different now because of the vulnerability of that category of people. And now she's working as a pod leader at All Day with the J to try to help the kids do distance learning, right? She had all of the skills and all of the capabilities to have the compassion and understanding for people. And now it went from older people who needed her help to younger people that needed her help. And the utility of just being able to say, be who you need to be in this moment, and let us take advantage of that to create community in the best way we know how under the circumstances. And they have totally embraced the idea that they are not their job description. And for me, I think that proves to be motivational, because even when they find struggle within the job category they're in because of COVID restrictions or because of circumstances or whatever, they don't feel that lack of purpose. They still feel like they have something to contribute because they're not about their job. They're about themselves.
Well, it's so, everyone wants to look back, but I could do it this way, and launch themselves into that spot. And it's exciting to see you giving people the space to find what works and what advances in today's environment, because it's pivoting and moving so much, and so much of that pivot is outside of our control. So we're really moving around these rocks that keep getting dropped in front of us. So I know that your staff appreciates so much your willingness to both coach them to get there, but also to give them the space to find that path with you guys. That's great. How does somebody help the community center? How do they, do they find a website? Is there information they go to? If someone looks at this and watches this later, because we'll have a lot of people here who will see it, and then a lot of people who view it later and are going to say, wow, I like what they're about. What does that person do to connect with you or connect with the center to help?
So our website is L as in leopard, F as in Frank, JCC.org. Which gives you a window into all the breadth of services and things that we do, and sort of a deeper dive into programmatically, not only what we're doing in the moment, but what we have done in the past, so that people can sort of see the full scope of the work. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You can find us at both of those places, and both of our social media. I mean, we're on Twitter too. We use that a little bit less because it's not exactly our speed, but the messaging on Instagram and Facebook will give you a window into sort of the heart and soul of who the JCC is, because it's really representative of our brand voice and the things that we want to express to people, particularly around building community and being together when we can't really be together, and what that means right now. And that's what we've been focused on, that positive messaging. So that's the best way to connect. There are ways to donate on all of those platforms. And obviously, we are so appreciative of people's willingness to contribute to our efforts, because it does allow us to really meet the needs of our community at a time of particular crisis.
Well, we appreciate what you do for the community. This is Real Talk with Ryan with Betzy Lynch. Betzy, I have one last question, and then we'll finish and then open it up for live questions. I'm always fascinated when I talk to people, and through this series, we've met and talked with so many great people who are pillars in the community, and you included, but I'm always interested in learning how they work through barriers, work through obstacles, and stay motivated. Yeah, and I've had this question asked of me, and as I think about it, I'm gonna ask it to you, because I'd love to get your perspective on, we're always going to get thrown curves. We're always going to be dealing with obstacles. Things are not going to go. You described it in your path. I thought I'd be here, and then I thought I'd be here, and I thought I'd be here, and now I'm in San Diego, which I never thought I'd be anywhere. But as those obstacles come up, what do you do for yourself to help you keep pushing through, to help you say, I see this, I'm going to meet this challenge, I'm going to stay focused on where I'm going? What are some of the things that help you get through that so that you can advance and move forward with the mission that both you and the Jewish Community Center deliver?
This probably won't be too helpful in being replicable to other people, but this is the answer to your question, which is, for me, it's connecting to the Jewish tradition. For me, it is in spaces where there's a wonderful Yiddish expression that says, man plans and God laughs, right? So it's this idea that we try to create whatever we're going to create, and there's definitely some other reason why it's either working out or it's not working out, and that's sort of beyond us. I believe we have absolute free will and control over the things that we do as human beings, but there are moments of intersection where things happen in life where we don't totally understand it or understand why it's happening. People call that coincidence. I call it God being anonymous. I think it's in these small ways, in these small spaces, to find the piece of spark of sort of the very best of people, what I would consider a spark of God within each individual person. That if in the moment that I'm encountering a struggle, whether it's with a person or a set of circumstances, and I'm not totally sure how to approach it, I inevitably am able to find a resource in the 5,780 years of Jewish history where the problem that I'm having has happened at some other time. And inevitably, there's some clarity. It's not giving me a solution by any sense, but by me extracting myself from that and choosing to study in a different way, it moves me from the space of solving the problem to thinking on a higher level about it, and then I can see it in a different way. So I suppose for somebody that hasn't studied the Jewish tradition in the way I have, but any kind of diversion that would cause you to philosophically think differently about the circumstance that you're in. So it could be listening to Ryan, it could be listening to a podcast of something else, it could be listening to another spiritual leader or somebody that's telling great stories, or watching a TED Talk. It may just be that source of inspiration that just causes you to think about whatever it was in a different way. And inevitably, if I do that, particularly if I put the idea in my mind before I go to sleep, and then I think about the Jewish traditional piece that goes along with it, and then I wake up the next morning, and then the mornings where I spend time by myself because I exercise every morning, that's when I have my most moments of clarity. That's when I have the most moments of clarity where I've sort of removed myself and can see the problem from a different angle that allows me to get past it.
Well, on behalf of the whole community and personally, thank you for overcoming those obstacles and staying focused on what it is you and your organization do for so many. And really, not just in town, but all over the country. And I'm motivated by one person at a time, because each of us can impact one person at a time.
That's exactly right.
And if we each do a little bit, everybody is elevated. And if they do something for each of us, then we're elevated. And so I think we all resonate with what you're doing. We thank you for what you're doing, and we can't wait to see how the Jewish Community Center continues to elevate, and you continue to elevate us as we proceed through these crazy times. So Betzy, thank you for being our guest. We really appreciate having you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.